Hi, I'm Christina with the Broke Girl Society.
And I'm Terra with the Ambitious Addicts. And today we're here with a Saturday Step special. This is our first episode. We're going to start doing step work together, both talking about different addictions that we want to apply a 12-step program to and work the steps in front of you. We're going to do it once a month. So with that, Christina, why don't you start with what you're working on, then I'll say what I'm working on, and we can dive it, and then we can define each of our individual steps because they sound slightly different, but almost identical.
Yeah, sounds great. Okay, I am, if you're following along with me, you know that I'm working through the 12 steps for a gambling addiction. I'm a compulsive gambler.
Fantastic. And I too am a compulsive gambler in long-term recovery. And as I've grown in my recovery, I've noticed that I've got some codependency to work on. There happens to be a 12-step program for that. So I am working on step 1 for codependency.
Yeah, and I really feel like codependency and compulsive gambling have a lot in common. So this will be great. I think a lot of people will probably recognize their own codependency issues as we work through this. And so maybe it'll help them kind of, do a 2-for-1 kind of thing, right?
Yeah, you can get them both at the same time. Because I was early on in my gambling recovery, I was, in denial about codependency. So there we have it.
Yeah, I remember when my therapist first brought it up to me. She was like, "Have you read a book about codependency?" And I was like, "No, I'm not dependent on anybody." I didn't understand it. I thought it just meant like I was depending on people, and I'm like, no, I had no understanding of it. And then it was like further on down the line, as I learned more about it, and I'm like, oh wow, I am codependent. I'm very, very codependent. so this is gonna be great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I same reaction as you did. What are you talking about? No, I'm really independent. I don't need anybody. That phrase alone, if you find yourself saying it, might be an indication you'd like to research what is codependency.
Yeah, don't be like us. Just accept it. Just accept it from the beginning. Okay.
So my step reads, we admitted we were powerless over others, that our lives had become unmanageable.
Okay, and my step reads, we admitted we are powerless over gambling, that our lives have become unmanageable.
So almost identical, just a little different. Yeah. So I want to talk first about powerlessness and some of the unique experience we have as women. And we're working, for anyone who's curious, how we're working these steps and how we're getting the words that we're coming up with. We're together working through a book by Stephanie Covington, and it's called A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps. There's both a book and a workbook. So I'm reading from the book itself on page 10 under the heading, Are We Really Powerless? It says, the word powerless is a problem for many women. Many of us were taught to let something or someone else control our lives. It can be difficult to acknowledge we are powerless over, in my case, other people, because we already feel powerless in so many other areas of our lives. Admitting powerlessness may appear to be one more instance of our familiar one down position. It seems like too much to ask of us. Yet, only when we admit our powerlessness and lack of control over our addiction can we begin to find out where we truly have power in our lives. This is the first of many paradoxes we experience in recovery. I had a hell of a time with powerlessness and accepting the word, kind of layering that in with my fierce independence and that insistence that I didn't need anybody. And one of my ways of controlling my relationship with others, trying to exert power over it, was to try to change the dynamic of the relationship between me and the other person instead of accepting this is what is. So that's just related to the codependency piece. I can see that I truly have been relying on other people for things that I could give myself. And I've also been, sometimes pushing away relationships because of some of the feelings of powerlessness that I had about what would happen if the relationship changed. So
Okay.
that's a bit on the powerlessness for me as it relates to codependency.
I think for me, if I'm talking about powerlessness, how I perceive it is whenever we live in our shame and our guilt or even our denial, all that holds power over us. So that's how I look at working the word powerless into my step work is I don't want to give those emotions and those feelings power over me. Like I have to address those things and take that power back, which is why it's really important to me to really acknowledge things as I process them and really kind of see where I've lost power in my life, because that's where it becomes unmanageable, because it just goes crazy and that's how it becomes unmanageable for me, is by not acknowledging these emotions and these things and taking back the power, so that I
Yeah.
can move forward.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other thing that I've come to learn since doing my gambling recovery is when I was early on in recovery and I'm looking at this first step, I'm like, I'm not powerless. Like I just had this attitude about it as if powerlessness was a state of being and not a state of feeling. And so I was truly feeling powerless. That emotion of powerlessness is different than you literally have no power, right? But when we're feeling powerless, it it does feel like there's no way out. There's nothing to do. So we kind of spin in all the other feelings because we don't want to feel powerless. So we'll just shift to shame or guilt or regret or some other really fun emotion.
And that's very true. That's very true. I've noticed that a lot, about kind of shifting the blame and kind of like, like I used to blame everybody. It was everybody's fault that I was gambling. But at the end of the day, it wasn't. Once I've kind of started doing some of the step work and kind of started digging down a little bit deeper, I knew at the end of the day, it's me. I'm responsible for the choices I've made. Um, and just like I'm responsible for my recovery and the choices that I make to continue to recover. So that's kind of how I think by owning that it was my choice to start this addiction, I took back some power, and I feel like I can use that power to help continue on this road of recovery for me.
Right.
So, yeah. And it's funny that you say that, because you've told me in previous conversations about, if you hear me talk about a certain situation, you'll be like, nah, you're trying to control that situation. So I think you've actually been working on this longer than you think, because I know a while back, you're quick to be like, okay, like you're trying to control her reaction and you can't. So
Yeah, I'm on to myself about it, but it doesn't mean I don't struggle with it, right?
yeah, right.
So I see it. And I think that's the gift of the program. Had I not gone through the program of recovery for working the steps with gambling and quitting gambling, because I was powerless, when I thought about quitting gambling, and then my mind would leap right to, you can't stop. We need to get, it's like my brain truly believed that I needed to gamble. And that for me that was true powerlessness. I had never experienced in my life that almost trance-like state where I felt like I wasn't even making a decision. And yet I was, right? I know logically I was making a decision, but when you're in addiction and you're in action, as we say in talking about gambling specifically, it feels so urgent. And like if I don't fulfill this need inside of me, like something's gone very wrong, right? So I truly was powerless when it came to gambling. I tried to control it. I failed every time I tried to control it.
Yeah, me
And
too.
you too? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there was plenty of evidence that I had surrendered all my power to the external force of gambling, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think too, whenever we look at that, it feels like when we're caught up in active addiction, that we don't even have the choice. Like there is no choice. Like but but it's just, it's it's all in your mindset. Because I heard somebody say today, a lot of people say that, fighting this gambling addiction, we don't have any willpower. We don't have the willpower to stop. But if you really think about it, compulsive gamblers have enormous amounts of willpower because we find the willpower, right, to go and gamble, do whatever we got to do to go gamble, right? That's sheer willpower. So it's all about learning how to shift that willpower into working it for you instead of against you. So that was really kind of a thinker, when I heard that. I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
I was using my willpower to be sneaky and find ways to hide my addiction. That's cute. I see the same thing about the word ambition. Like people, respond to when I talk about, I ask the question, are you ambitious? A lot of people will be like, no, I've never been ambitious. And I'm like, really? Tell me about that time when you couldn't find your drug or behavior of choice. What
exactly
great lengths did you go to? Yeah. And on the topic of willpower too, I think we look at how much of that actually was us trying to exert our will to gamble, right? And we tried that and we created the unmanageability, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later. But as we get into some of the future steps and talking about the recognition we have of how we've been really holding on to our will being the way. But we'll save that discussion for when we're on those
steps. Yeah, that's a very true statement though, finding that. But I thought that's so true. And so I think for me in my own recovery, it's kind of turning that willpower around. And, I don't know how I did it. I couldn't tell you the magic formula for it. It's just a lot of mental work, a lot of, just putting in the work. And somehow I've shifted that willpower. And that's what drives me today. And that's why, I try and be so active in the community, to try and just keep that willpower going for good versus evil, kind of thing. So that's kind of how I look at it. But okay, so in this workbook that we're working, which is the workbook associated with the book that you just read out of A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps workbook. Okay, so under step 1, and this is a great workbook to really prompt you and really work through these steps because, you get that basic step. We admitted we were powerless over gambling, that our lives have become unmanageable. Most of it's pretty evident, whether it's finances or, home life. But then there's some that's not as recognizable, right? So there's some that you didn't even think about. And I mean, I when I was going through this first one, and the first prompt is awareness. So it's being aware, I think, of, how this is impacting our lives, how this is making our lives unmanageable, different levels of unmanageability. So it's kind of interesting. And she gives some examples. So it makes it a little bit easier to kind of dig and find some answers that may not be that easy.
Yeah. And I think the awareness starts with our thinking, and the workbook itself helps us get outside of the engine just running automatically and get a real good look at, on paper, what poured out of my mind when I was prompted to answer that question. We can see it in a little bit more of an objective way than we can when we're just letting the thoughts race inside of us. At least that's been my experience, that putting it down on paper, and the benefit of a workbook like this, prompting us around areas we can think. It's helped me tremendously. It still does today, not just in my recovery, but in goal attainment and all sorts of things, like pen to paper.
Oh, no, I'm 100%. I was never a journaler. And I think in one of our very first conversations, we talked about this. I couldn't even keep up with like Weight Watchers because I just wouldn't journal. I wouldn't keep track of the points. I wouldn't do any of that stuff. Journaling has really changed my whole thought process. Like, it's like when you write it, even some of those really hard things that you're struggling to process, if you just write it out and then you read it, it's almost like you can kind of step away from it or step away from those emotions. It gives you a better sense of processing it, understanding it. And so journaling is definitely, definitely my number one tool, I think, with recovery. So it's been pretty amazing.
Mine too, and the connection and the knowing of not being alone is another piece of it, and why I was excited when you brought up the idea of let's let people see us work the steps. So did you have a favorite writing prompt on that awareness, or one that you want to talk about your own awareness of unmanageability, or think back to your early days, because you're climbing into the triple digits?
Yeah, I know. I already at the time of this recording, I'm 104 days gamble free. Yes! So I'm stoked about that. Okay, so under awareness, she talks about, have you obsessed or fantasized about your addictive behavior? Now, the reason why this is interesting to me, because it's not anything I would have even thought about. It's not something I would have even reflected on. And I know there's a lot of people out there. I am not one that has had this issue, but they dream about it. You know, they have dreams, like these very vivid dreams about gambling. And it's not something I've ever had. Now I've had, like, if I was up all night or up late, and then I've had it to where I couldn't wind down. Like, I might've still heard the bells, you know, in my mind when I got home. Like, I might've had the sensation. It's kind of like when you leave the ocean, you kind of get the rocking in the water sensation. That's kind of how it is when you leave the casino after being there. Yeah, you hear the ding, 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 ding in the back of your mind. And so that's kind of how I explain that. But as far as like fantasizing about it, or just like obsessively, like, I've got to get there, at first I was like, no, I never really did that. But then as I really got to thinking, it's like, especially on paydays, I always just thought if I could go double my paycheck, then I could get caught up on the stuff that I had gotten behind on, because I was using the money for evil. And yeah, I would obsess about that. I would obsess about going and getting that jackpot. And the sad reality of that is, even if I did, I didn't leave with it. And my paycheck was usually gone too. So that's
not advisable, right?
Not advisable
at all.
Yeah.
Well, I'll speak for my gambling, and then I'll shift and talk a little bit about how this shows up for me with codependency, because I'm actively needing to work on that. Gotten a lot better, but I've never worked the steps on it. So I thought this was a perfect opportunity, because I've worked steps on gambling multiple times, I regularly do, to add the steps to a new area of my life and see what kind of impact I can have there. My gambling experience with the obsessive thinking, I sometimes would get through that last hour of the day at work. I was in a situation where I didn't really love my leader at the time. And so I would just sit there and obsessively think about, okay, I give this like one more hour and you can just leave and you can go to the casino. Or it got to the point, seriously, where I was on my way to work, and if the light at the left-hand turn is green, you get to go to the casino tonight. Or the obsessive thinking about the debt and the devastation that was the result of my gambling and creating the unmanageability of my life was also something I spent a lot of time and energy thinking about while I was active in my addiction.
Yeah, I did too, but it still never kept me out. Like, it almost would send me back, because I would get so overwhelmed by just thinking about it. Like, it was just this constant vicious craziness. Yeah. But yeah, obsessing over, yeah.
Well, and logically, we look at it now and we're like, that's really fascinating. I thought the solution to the problems that I created by my problem was the solution to my problem. Like, what?
Yeah, really. You're like, wait, what?
Does that make any sense? The mental gymnastics we're doing to justify why we keep doing something that's creating harm in our lives is wow. You know, when I look at it today.
Absolutely crazy how we rationalize.
Go ahead.
Absolutely crazy how we rationalize some of the scenarios in our brain. Like, yeah. And it just goes to show you how much our brains, you know, they're starting to finally talk about the damage compulsive gambling is doing to our brains. And it's amazing when you go and you read this stuff and how much our brains actually change. But here's a little something I want to say. If our brains change due to our compulsive behavior or our addiction, then our brains can change with healing, right? Our brains can change with recovery. So I just want you to know, if you're out there listening, that even though, we may have rationalized some crazy shit, to justify what we were doing, as you go through recovery, your brain does start to heal. You start to see how rationalizing that way is not healthy. That, so those things do start to change as you get further along in recovery. So just to let you know that I don't want anybody to think you can't change back.
Yeah. And it's in direct contrast, continuing the behavior is if we're in that place where like, I want to quit. I know I was in that place for a long time and not successful in my quitting. And we want to quit, and then we start to notice and build this awareness that this rationalization is actually driving us back into the doors of the place that we're trying to stay away from. That's where this awareness is super powerful, where you start to realize I'm thinking things that are taking me right back to choosing to believe in the moment that gambling is the answer. And that's an automatic thought pattern we've created. And the key we're doing with our brains now is we have to recreate whole new thought patterns. You feel sad, there's a different answer than gambling. You feel frustrated, there's a different answer than gambling. And we have to prove our new thinking true, but we have to know what we're thinking already in order to begin to make the shift.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And it's when you start to change your way of thinking, your mindset, starting to use that willpower for good versus evil. And I say that, and it sounds like I'm being lighthearted about it, but I think everybody listening probably understands the evil side of things. When you use that for good, even though some days are still a struggle, it's still so much easier to be able to talk yourself out of those urges and those things that come up, because you're building the tools as you go along, to be able to say, look, we're doing this financial inventory. We're doing, things that are further down in the steps. So you have a better understanding of the unmanageability or the wreckage that this has caused. So you're able to, like, I personally have been able to talk myself out of something just about as quickly as it's come on for me. So, so it's really important to be aware of how, like really digging in and seeing how this addiction has made things unmanageable. Being aware of it, whether it's in your finances, your personal life, your work life, you've got to really be aware of where the damage is being done. So
and aware of what you truly want in your life.
Yes.
When we're caught in it, and when we're in it, right? We oftentimes aren't thinking ahead in a goal-oriented way, other than the goal being I want to fuel my addiction. And for me, that was it. I'm over here like remembering, like, when we talk about these things, at least for me, I really remember the early days when I'm talking to somebody who is earlier in their recovery than I am presently. And I remember the unmanageability, in particular with my finances, not just, the debt and that portion of it, but also the insanity of, sitting at the casino, moving money around in my bank accounts in order to be able to make a withdrawal, calling the credit card company like from the ATM, like right in front of it, because I just needed more money right now. And that's not a manageable way of thinking about your finances by any means. So
not at all.
Yeah, and I want to give an example of the codependency stuff. So on the codependency side, there is this desire to control others, and that in so many ways, right? What they think of you, how they treat you, what they do not do. And one of mine that I struggle with is the what they think of me. the fear of judgment. And, you know, shape shifting is, and I'm conscious of it now. I have that awareness now. So there's less and less of it, but it's a pattern that's pretty long standing. And I believe that likely comes from some of my childhood influence where, you know, I had to walk on eggshells around some people who might have high levels of temper. And so I think that was a self-protection mechanism to shapeshift and do what others wanted. And now in adulthood, that shows up in other ways. And also being very concerned what others thought of me. And I don't really know where that comes from, but maybe that's also part of the kind of chaotic house, you know, trying to please that individual. So I got attention maybe because I was neglected, or think I was neglected. I think they were doing the best that they can. I can see that now. But when I think about my unmanageability of that, it shows up in such subtle little ways. So I'll give an example of something. I think I shared it. Maybe you were there in another place where I shared it. I don't remember. I've been sharing it with a couple people and it's resonated. So we might as well share it with everybody who listens to our podcasts.
Absolutely.
So I had some dirty dishes on the counter. I do value my home being tidy. I find that to create peace. I also accept about myself that I don't love folding laundry, but I do like when I walk in my kitchen, the counters are clean and the dishes, there's no dirty dishes in the sink. And I value that. And I looked at a couple dirty dishes that I had stacked and not put where they belong. The dishwasher had clean dishes in it. So I kind of made this little excuse, you know, like you got to do the whole, like it's going to take, you know, all 5 minutes it's going to take. So I caught myself, and this is where the awareness is so key, thinking, no one will know. No one will see it. It doesn't matter. Well, I'm not no one.
You're right.
And you're not no one. And then I, you know, went a little bit down that same path and was like, did I do that when I was gambling too? And I sure did. No one would know if I didn't get home by a certain hour because my son was home asleep and he wouldn't know. And he's the only one who lived with me. No one would know about me taking that withdrawal from my 401k because I didn't share my money with anyone. No one will know. And I see this pattern of like, even in the decisions I'm making about myself and about my life, that I'm operating and shifting that through a lens of what other people will think. So that was a moment of unmanageability, like even me getting my dishes done, which I enjoy having a clean counter. I'm thinking about what other people will think of my kitchen as if and my own opinion and what I think of the dirty kitchen isn't enough to be considered.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting way to look at it. That's very true because it's like, even like sometimes we beat ourselves up for our own, like exactly what you said, you know, you're beating yourself up because you're not living to the standard that you want or you feel like you aren't, right. And then we're so hard on ourselves on those things. And you know, another way that codependency, and especially in this addiction, but a lot of them, it comes to, you know, when you talk about you know, fear of judgment when it comes to addressing our addiction, right? And then so your codependency issue there would be fear to talk about it because you're fearful of what other people are going to think, fearful, you know, and that plays a huge part. So that's why I feel like codependency plays such a huge role, because when you look at it, that's the reason why a lot of us don't talk about it, you know, because we're so worried about what other people think.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you, like, once I started talking about my addiction and once I, you know, I got on social media, and at first I was tight on my social media. Like I didn't want any of my friends or family to see it. Because it was, you know, it was talking about my gambling addiction, and I was so fearful that somebody that I knew would see that, and then they would judge me. But I got to really thinking about that, and I'm like, you know, it goes back to you cannot control how others think of you. They
Right.
already think a certain way of you. So finding out something different, it might change their perspective, but you have no control over that.
Yeah.
The only
And
thing
there's
you
that, go ahead.
the only thing that you can control is just how you're going to recover and how you're going to proceed with this. And then maybe, you'll find some freedom in that part of that codependency, that fear of judgment. But that, I think that's one of the biggest things that hold people back from acknowledging that they have an addiction or a problem. But also from just moving forward in their recovery. And so now that I'm, so many days in, or, 3 months or so in, I tell people, like, I'm very open about it now. Because I got to looking back, I'd already lost so many people with my addiction alone. So, and that was from hiding it.
Yeah.
So now I would rather lose them from talking about it and being my true self and being this honest version of myself than to lose people because I'm lying and hiding.
Right.
So it's definitely a shift in mindset, that I keep talking about throughout, because it's just so important to really see things through a different lens. It's very, very important.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that fear of judgment coupled with the intimacy with ourselves, like we're so disconnected from ourselves that maybe it becomes, another excuse to keep going in our addiction because we're so scared. And then we're relying on ourselves. We're like, I can do this. I got to figure this out. I can do this on my own, despite all the proof that we did not successfully do it on our own. But it's also that fierce independence, to tying the codependency back in, that fierce independence and the fear of judgment together make asking for help incredibly, incredibly difficult. I know that was hard for me.
Me too. And it just finally took me realizing that I couldn't do it alone. Like I couldn't do it alone, and I had to have help because I wanted to be better. But that's another thing that it took me acknowledging my addiction was I was scared that I would be held accountable, that I wouldn't be able to gamble anymore. And that was how I dealt with everything. It's like, if I can't do that, what am I going to do? Like, face
what am I going to do when I'm sad or mad or any emotion that I'm unwilling to feel? Then what?
Yeah, exactly. Well, then you dive into social media and then you avoid them for a little while. And then you realize that this is just my own personal story. Then you realize that, or somebody way smarter and, who's been down this road will tell you you're avoiding yourself. And then I'm not going to name any names. I mean, but somebody I know told me that. And so then that's when the work really started for me, is acknowledging that I was avoiding being with myself. And now I have self-reflected so much, I am sick of myself. So yeah, it's been a rough 100 days.
Yeah, I still get sick of myself. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about any program or community support. It doesn't matter. You and I are totally aligned, and like, we could care less. Like, you want to work a 12-step program? Great. You want to journal your way out of something? Great. You want to go hide in the woods? Great. Like, just do whatever it takes to help yourself recover. So I know we're like, your recovery, your choice. That's kind of what we both really believe. And yet we recognize the power that steps like we're talking about today have had in our lives. And we're able to have this because someone else who went through it before us was willing to share it with us. And we provide our experience to one another as a true gift because we get it. We get the pain, we get the hurt, we get the regret. I mean, we truly understand what that feels like. And we don't want anyone to suffer like that anymore.
Absolutely.
So we're here talking about it. Like, this is what the steps look like if you're curious.
It's really just digging in there and trying to figure this stuff out. It's like like they say, one day at a time. Sometimes it's 1 hour at a time. Sometimes, and especially in early recovery, it's an emotional roller coaster. You're up, you're down, you're up again, you're down. I mean, it's just, but just keep moving on through that. It's almost like your emotions can almost be unmanageable a little bit if you want to tie that back in, because there's no way to really rein them in. And I just learned, especially being female and having, the hormones on top of all that, that can really play havoc on recovery.
Yeah.
Because you're feeling, so you're having all this emotional withdrawal. And then on top of that, you throw the crazy emotions, on top. It can be really
crazy.
Some people are. Like, man, I've met some like really, really like,
I know.
crazy.
I'm getting disenchanted with the word itself.
Crazy?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Maybe we should find like what's a different word for crazy that we could throw in there?
I think
wild, like wild emotions.
Mental health is unmanaged, right?
Yeah.
The same thing can happen if we're not emotionally regulating, whether we need medicine for that or we don't need medicine for that. But people, we think about the labels people put on gamblers, and that's degenerate, like, like
morally corrupt.
Yeah. And when we talk about normalizing, discussing mental health, like using the word crazy for me brings up, images of somebody who's not needing treatment. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I think the way I look at it now is very much like that person has a mental health condition that needs treatment. And that's changed for me as I've met more and more people who need treatment for mental health conditions. And I've grown in my knowledge of all the different things that we might need support for as humans in this world, with the gift of all the emotions we've been given in environments where we're told it's totally normal to have a drink to not feel, to have a cigarette to not feel, to have coffee to not feel, to have anything to not feel, because we're just supposed to always be happy.
Okay. We're supposed to always be okay.
Everything's fine.
Fine. We're just fine. Why do you ask? Why do you ask?
I'm fine. My favorite meme is the one with I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like a cartoon character. There's a cup of coffee on a desk and everything's like burning around. And it's like, fine, everything's fine. That's the robot voice in my head that cartoon has. Everything's fine, everything's fine.
But that's true when you think of right when you're coming out of addiction. Like your whole world is like literally imploding all around you, and you're trying to walk through this and figure it out. And that's an excellent analogy on how like finally making that first step, and you've got all this unmanageability and all this not crazy wildness behind us.
Yeah.
And we're trying to carve our way through it, and find our way to some less wildness, trying to find some peace in our lives that we've struggled with. Yeah. So
look at how my codependency showed up trying to control what words you used.
Great example. You're like, we're not going to use crazy. Let's see.
So it's my choice not to use the word. You're in charge of your words, not me. You say whatever you want.
No, I kind of like how you talked about that though. Because sometimes you do think about the words that people put on, gambling addicts. And if you're in the groups, you have your own groups of, beautiful, intelligent, strong women who have battled with addiction. It doesn't, when you're thinking of the labels, and I think that's why there's not a lot of movement for this addiction because of the labels associated with it. And really, if they took stock of who was struggling with this addiction, they'd probably be really, really surprised.
I think with gambling in particular, well, lots of behavioral addictions, on the surface that don't manifest with physical symptoms. Yeah, we get cranky. Yeah, we get tired. Yeah, we get snippy. And I think our personalities change a lot while we're active, and especially when we're in unmanageability. Um, can't see it, can't smell it, can't taste it. Like no one's, if a smoker smoked, if a drinker drank, if a heroin user is nodding off, like all those things can be seen. And yeah, I could talk all day about the invisible addiction and how, and I would say codependency is an invisible addiction too, but I don't nowhere near what my gambling created in my life.
It's pretty amazing how you can kind of really look at your actions and really try and figure out why you're doing what you're doing. And once you can figure that out, then things become a lot more manageable.
Yeah. Same thing with redirecting, like the what do I want, right? Redirecting, like, what is it? Why am I doing this thing? What do I want? Like the example I had was me in the kitchen, right? What do I want? Well, I want a clean kitchen, but I'm suddenly using other people as the excuse to not achieve my goal. The people who aren't even coming to visit me are the reason I don't need to do what I want to do. Like, what in the world? Or the amount of time I spent really thinking about a meeting I'm having with a friend who I haven't spent some time with. And I was just making up this whole freaking story in my head about what she was thinking, what she was feeling, and what that meant to me. And, let's walk down the road of worst case scenario. That's where my brain just loves to go. And I had the most beautiful connection with that person yesterday who told me all the garbage her brain was throwing at her all this time. And we just laughed at our own insecurity and chatted about it. And it was all unnecessary, unmanageable thinking that consumed my time, my energy, my heart. Because I was, like, maybe I should grieve the friendship. Was this, like, okay, maybe I'm supposed to feel sad right now. Like, and all of it was BS. All of it.
Classic overthinking on like really just like running all these scenarios in your head, and then it's like you do all this mental work and you get so stuck in all this mental work, and then you see that person and they're like, hey, what's up? Like, I've just really been busy. And you're like, oh, I thought like you were like I thought we weren't friends anymore. Like I thought our life together was over. Like, and they're like, no, I've got this project to work and I've really just been busy.
Life. Yeah.
And a lot of times they think that we're okay. Like I had a situation where a friend was just like, you're the one friend I thought I didn't have to worry about. Yeah. So they weren't really feeling like they had to check in, when in reality, I was probably the one that they needed to worry about the most. Yeah. But that's how we like to perceive ourselves, that we're okay, we're fine. Yeah. And then people actually are kind of like, I don't think so, but if she says it, okay, and so yeah. But okay, well, I guess we'll just kind of bring this step 1 to a close. Now, I think we decided we're going to do an episode a month, right? For the next 12 months. So we're going to work a step a month.
We can change our minds though. We're allowed to do that. But as of right now, I think that's what we said.
I'm just going to give you a quick read for next month's episode, just to kind of give you an idea on step 2. So for my relation to this and my compulsive gambling addiction, step 2 is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So that will be step 2 for next month.
My step reads identically.
Oh, okay. Then we'll both have our own version of that. But this one was kind of hard for me. So it definitely took a lot of people around me to help me sort this out. So this one's a tricky one for some.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. It's reach out for support to either one of us if you need a sounding board, if you're working through admitting you're powerless or just trying to digest the unmanageability and how you define unmanageability in your life. We are here to love and support you as you choose recovery.
All right. Well, I guess that's all for today.
Awesome.